Thanks a lot, Jim, and it's a real pleasure to be here tonight. So I'm a Melbourne University graduate. I'm a Melbourne native. I grew up out in a suburb called Heathmont, which is out near Ringwood, about 25 kilometres from here, and I used to catch the Belgrave or the Liddell line into Melbourne University. I was saying to Alex before, I'd drive my Datsun 180B and park at the cemetery and walk across to Melbourne University. I did a law degree and an economics degree and spent my fair share of time down at Norton, so I hope that Norton still exists. And I had a wonderful time. And so it's a real treat for me to come back to the university and speak to you today. So I'm going to talk for about 20 or 30 minutes, and I'm going to talk about a topic which I think is really important and critical for us, and that's, do we have the right culture as a country to be a global leader in innovation? And I'm going to weave in some things that we're doing at GE into that conversation, but it won't just be about GE. And so I'm very happy at the end of the presentation, we've got Q&A and we're here till 7 o'clock, right, Alex? So I'm very happy at the end of my speech to take any specific questions about GE, so we cover that ground as well. But the topic I'm talking on tonight I think is really important, and I want to get going on that now. So let me just start by reflecting on the fact that I was lucky enough to go to the Olympics in Rio this year. It's my fourth Olympics, and it was a really great experience. I saw Usain Bolt in the 100-metre final. I went to the beach volleyball final on Copacabana Beach, which was the most unique sporting experience I've ever been to, because it started at midnight. The game actually started at midnight. So that was kind of weird. But it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. But as I was sort of in Rio, I was reading all of the Australian newspapers, and I was really kind of intrigued by the hand-wringing that was going on back home about Australia's performance. And the fact is, we punch above our weight in sport. We always have. We're a nation of only 24 million people, yet we were aiming to be a top 5 country on the Olympics medal tally. And we finished 10th. And based on what you read, you would have thought that we failed. And we think we should do better than a country like Great Britain, despite the fact that they have 3 times our population and they invest twice as much money as we do on Olympic sports. So now we have this really robust debate going on in the community about how we reclaim what we perceive to be our natural place in the global sporting hierarchy, top 5 country in the world. And as that debate goes on, I can't help but juxtapose it against the debate that's going on and the conversation going on at the moment around innovation. See, we want to be a top 5 nation at the Olympics, and we consider 10th to be a fail. But consider this, the Economic Forum ranks us 23rd in the world on innovation. WIPO Global Innovation Index has us at 19. Boston Consulting Group rank us at 22 in their survey. But none of this rates a mention. It's not front page news, there's no inquiry. I imagine it would be a completely different scenario if we slipped to the mid-20s on the Olympics medal tally. Now, I'm not advocating that we reduce our focus on sport. It's part of who we are as a nation, and the tangible and intangible benefits for the country are huge. But what I am advocating, I'm advocating that we can use sport as an example for what we can achieve as a nation when we make something a priority. We can take on the world, we can be fearless, and we can hold ourselves to an ambitious standard. If we applied the same scrutiny, expectation, and commitment to innovation that as we do to sport, we could be punching above our weight in this area as well. But the fact is, we don't, and the global rankings don't lie. So what's it going to take? Well, it's not as though we're not talking about innovation. Over the last couple of years, the conversation around innovation and the discussion around innovation has kind of reached fever pitch. It may be one of the most overused words in the dictionary at the moment. And the fact that we're talking about it, the fact that we're having open conversations and debates about the best policies, the best programs, the best incentives, suggests we're heading in the right direction. But there's one thing we're missing in the entire conversation about innovation. The best policies, regulations and incentives are worth nothing if we don't have the right culture. And in all the debate about innovation, this is the one critical thing that I think is missing. We outperform in a sporting arena not just because we invest money, we outperform because it's part of our DNA. It's part of who we are. We make it a priority. We invest time and effort. We invest in our children from the moment they're born. We have unrealistic expectations about our children, and you only have to stand on the sidelines of Saturday sport to know what I'm talking about here. As a country, we want success in the sporting field, and we play to win. And innovation's no different. At the heart of innovation lies culture. And the fact is, our culture is not where it needs to be. We're not making innovation and investment in innovation enough of a priority. We're not investing enough time and effort, and we're not playing to win. And the conversation about innovation is only one part of the bigger discussion, because the bigger issue here is not just about innovation. The bigger issue here is about our global economic competitiveness. And that's the essence of what I want to speak to you about today. Do we have the right culture as a country, not just to drive innovation, but to drive the global economic competitiveness that underwrites the growth and prosperity that we all want as Australians? You know, the fact is, if I'm being completely honest, as a nation, I think we've lost some of our edge. We used to be a freewheeling country that acted like we had nothing to lose. Now we're trying to defend what we have rather than boldly going after what we don't have. We used to proudly reject the constraints of authority. Now we let the layers of bureaucracy thicken. We used to solve a problem with a new way of doing something. Now we solve a problem by putting in place a new law or regulation. Our success was built on daring and flair. Now we're trying to protect ourselves from ourselves. And other nations, and this is a critical point, other nations, our competition, have become what Australia used to be: aggressive, hungry, ambitious, not constrained by their past. And I saw that firsthand when I was working with GE in global markets, when I was working in Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America, in Russia, CIS, in Asia. There's a hunger out there amongst our competition that we have to be aware of, because the competition is coming. And if you don't believe what I'm saying, consider this. In the 1950s, Australia embarked on one of the most ambitious and courageous industrial projects in the world with the building of the Snowy Hydro Scheme. So when that was completed in 1974, there were 7 power stations, 16 major dams, 145 kilometres of interconnected tunnels, 80 kilometres of aqueducts. And they continue to play a vital role in the growth and development of Australia's economy. Today, the water diverted by the Snowy Hydro Scheme underwrites over $3 billion in agricultural products and generates clean, renewable energy for millions of homes. So that scheme, the Snowy Hydro, took 25 years to build and cost $820 million, which is a big check back in those times. Over 100,000 workers were employed on that project over the life of the project. Two-thirds of those were migrants. This was a remarkable achievement and was just a really great and stellar example of Australia's post-war pioneering spirit and our fearless attitude at that time. And I pose this question. Would the Snowy Hydro Scheme get built today? Could we build a Snowy Hydro Scheme today? As a country, we're becoming increasingly closed off to change, to risk, and to opportunity. There is too much negative rhetoric, too much protectionism, not enough openness, and not enough collaboration. We're too quick to say no and not courageous enough to say yes. The naysayers and the disbelievers have too many levers to pull and too many platforms to shout from to slow down progress. And you know what? We're letting them get away with it. We're not playing to win, we're playing not to lose. As a country, I think we've become too comfortable in 2016. And this is the uncomfortable truth. If we're going to be at the forefront of innovation, and if we're going to continue to compete economically on the global stage, we need to take a look at our culture as much as we look at the policies, regulations and incentives that support our ambition. So what needs to change? Look, I don't pretend to have all the answers. And there's a lot that needs to be thought about on this topic. But there are three basic things that I think we need to be thinking about and need to be doing. Number one, we need to let our leaders lead. So in GE, we apply a philosophy that you either lead, you follow, or you get out of the way. Australia has a lot of great leaders, and we have an enormously talented workforce that is capable of competing with the best in the world. But the fact is we have too many things and too many people getting in the way, and that's slowing us down. Big business in Australia, if I can use that term, is responsible for 2 million jobs, $98 billion in annual company taxes, and a further $59 billion in income tax paid by their employees. 20% of all jobs in Australia are created by big business. 3 in every $5 of tax revenue in Australia is paid by big business. And hundreds of thousands of SME companies in Australia, small and medium-sized companies in Australia, only exist because they supply products or services to business. The wealth and prosperity of the nation, the high living standards that we all enjoy, are underwritten by business. Yet somehow over the journey, business and big business in particular has become demonised. And it's become a caricature that's easily targeted and used as bait, and it is slowing down business from what it does best, which is creating jobs and building the wealth of the economy. And business needs to reclaim the narrative here. And we need to do a better job of explaining what we do and explaining who we are. There are very few businesses in the world that are bigger than GE. We employ 350,000 people around the world. We operate in 175 countries around the world. But who is GE? I mean, who are we? Well, it's the engineer who's servicing the engine, the aircraft engine, that's going to be on your next flight. That same engine is going to make sure you get home safely to your family after you travel. It's the radiologist who's training the clinician on how to operate our medical diagnostic equipment so we can properly detect cancer and we can healthily deliver your unborn baby. It's a scientist who's working on technology breakthroughs in our renewable energy business so we can reduce carbon emissions. And it's a technician installing water filtration devices so we can all enjoy clean water and avoid the ravages of waterborne diseases. This is GE and this is big business. And that is the message we need to be getting out. And we're not doing a good enough job of it, and we've lost control of the narrative. And it's not a problem that's unique to Australia, by the way. This is something that we're seeing all around the world. And it applies not only to business, but the public, the general public, has lost faith in large institutions generally. And it's enabled populism and protectionism to gain a foothold. And you all see it playing out in the US at the moment. It's played out here in Australia. It played out in the UK with Brexit. It's playing out in the Philippines with their new president. It's playing out in many different places around the world. And the economic prosperity and welfare of Australia is so dependent on the success not only of business, but of all of our institutions. Government, business, academia. We all need to be functioning effectively and at full capacity, and we should be doing everything we can help to let them lead and to succeed, not to slow them down. The current rhetoric needs to change, and we all need to own it. And we need to look for ways to work together. We need to look for ways to work together between government, business, academia, research institutes. Last week, we launched a facility in Sydney which we're calling the Generator. It's a collaborative space in Redfern, sort of wedged between the University of Sydney and Data 61, where GE teams and customers are going to work together to come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things. But better than that, much better than that, we're launching a summer program where we're inviting university students to come into the Generator and work on real life problems that we're trying to solve for real customers, focused on software, big data, and the industrial internet, which is a part of the transformation that GE is going through at the moment as we go from being a company that historically has made big metal to a company that's making both software and hardware. And you know what? I just love this program. And the reason I love this program is because it brings together universities and big business. It gives students a chance to work on real-life challenges, and it gives GE employees a chance to tap into the brains and the enthusiasm of the undergrads. And you know what? They're also going to get course credits for what they do inside the generator, which is great for them. The other thing that's exciting about this is it's an experiment. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I said, you know what? Let's give it a try. Because I can't stand on the sidelines and say that we need more collaboration between business and universities and not be doing anything about it. As a leader, I have responsibilities. I have to be making sure that I'm putting myself into the arena of battle, and I'm doing my best to try to improve the collaboration within Australia and create the right ecosystem. And we all need to be thinking about how we can bridge these gaps, work more together, get the machine cranking, and get on with the job of leading the country. Second thing we need to be doing is we need to be putting a premium on speed, agility, and cost. Speed, agility, and cost. So I came back to Australia 2 years ago. I worked in Asia for 7 years. I was in Japan, I was in Hong Kong. And the big debate when I came back in late 2014 was around sending the contract for the submarines up to Japan. And the reason, why they were thinking about doing that, now that it's since changed and they're going to build them in South Australia, but one of the reasons at the time was that the Japanese could build the subs significantly cheaper than we could here in Australia. Now, I've lived in Tokyo for 7 years over 2 different stints, and I can tell you, Japan's not a cheap place to operate. It's bloody expensive in Japan. So I'm kind of shocked by this, and I'm thinking, when the heck did Japan become a low-cost country compared to Australia? When did that happen? And how did we let it happen? I don't know if you read the front page of the Australian newspaper today, but there was a pretty interesting article on the Carmichael Coal project that's being run by Adani. And look, you can have your own view on that project. You can absolutely have your own view, and you're 100% entitled to have your own opinion about that project. And I'm not here to advocate one way or the other for that project. But no one can justify the strangled process we have put that company through as they try to desperately invest billions of dollars into our country. As it stands, they've already invested $3 billion into Australia, and they still don't have a decision on whether the project can go ahead. $3 billion, and they still don't have a decision on whether the project can go ahead. And here's the thing, right? Here's the really important thing. What signal does that send to India, who has the potential to become one of Australia's biggest and most important trade partners, and a huge source of foreign direct investment for decades to come? It says, don't bother. It says, go somewhere else. And these are the conversations that happen within the corridors of power within India at the moment. This stuff gets noticed. This stuff gets noticed. Capital is liquid. Capital can flow to wherever it wants around the world. There's no imperative for them to come here. We have to create an environment where countries like India want to invest in Australia. I think sometimes we let the perfect get in the way of the good. In our quest to cover off every single risk and satisfy every single voice, we've created a strangled and expensive system that's starting to make us uncompetitive with the rest of the world. So GE is a complicated company, and reducing layers and bureaucracy is a constant battle. It's like vines in the Amazon. You cut them down and they grow back just as quickly. So you have to be constantly maniacal about simplifying your organisation. You have to be constantly looking for ways of reducing span in your organisation, eliminating layers, increasing speed of decision making, and doing everything with a sense of urgency and purpose. We go on crusades all the time within GE to achieve this, and we do it because we know if we don't, our competition is going to eat us alive. If we don't constantly work at being faster, if we don't constantly work at being simpler, if we don't constantly work at getting product to market quicker than our competition and at lower cost, then our competition is going to eat us alive. So that's what we think about all the time within GE. Australia needs to go on a crusade with respect to bureaucracy. The 3 layers of government and this is the important point, 3 layers of government working together with the private sector, with business, need to be all in. We have to strip back everything that doesn't matter. We need to harmonise everything that represents duplication. We need to stop abuses of processes, and we need to make this a national priority. And we need to start now. We need to start now. Because the harsh reality is that our competition, other countries that want what we have, they want our standard of living. They want our quality of life. They want our economic prosperity. They will exploit our weaknesses if they're not doing so already. The last one, the third one, is we need to think bigger. As a country, we need to think bigger. So when the innovation conversation started back in 2014, everyone was quick to jump on board. And why wouldn't you? It was exciting, it was different, it sounded like the right thing for us to be doing. But I think the conversation at that time was too narrow, and it left too many people behind because there was a natural pull towards the startup community and the consumer app world, which is understandable because everyone naturally associates with innovation with the likes of Uber, Airbnb, Facebook, you can name 100 others. And there's no doubt that innovation at the retail level is just critically important. It is critically important. And we need to be developing a vibrant and successful startup community. That is absolutely essential. But there is also a huge opportunity to bring innovation to a wider audience, particularly big industries where Australia has significant size and scale, and where our ideas can be exported around the world and where we have a global comparative advantage. So industries like mining, oil and gas, agriculture, these are industries that have historically been very manual, and where there hasn't been a significant investment in technology, and where a small increase in productivity has the capacity to add billions and billions of dollars to the Australian economy. So consider this, a $1 increase, a simple $1 increase in the price of iron ore adds about $800 million a year to Australia's export earnings, which in turn contributes $250 million to the federal budget. So a $1 increase in the price of iron ore, $250 million to the federal budget. That's a lot of schools, roads and hospitals right there. The same outcome can be achieved if you reduce the cost of production by applying innovative technology that makes the mining companies more efficient. And policy needs to be set with this in mind. Look, I'm very supportive of all the initiatives that are designed to help the startup community. Very supportive. But the dividend for the Australian economy can be even more significant if we also focus on the big end of town. Like as an example, I don't understand why you'd cap the R&D tax incentive at $100 million, which is currently the case. The very nature of innovation at industrial scale is that it's going to involve significant investment. But the benefit for the country is also potentially huge. So why would we restrict ourselves to swimming in the shallow end of the pool by capping the incentive? We also need to encourage our entrepreneurs to think bigger about the market and think differently about the market. Too many of our people only think of the market as Australia, or worse still, they only think of the market as Melbourne or Sydney. So why limit yourself to a market of 24 million people when you can potentially have a market of 7 billion people? And we see this all the time. And if you're sitting in this room thinking, I wouldn't mind going off and starting a startup, right? Think about that. Do you want your market to be 24 million or do you want your market to be 7 billion? So earlier this year, as an example, we acquired a company called Daintree Networks. They're making building automation software. So they aggregate all of the data. It's a software company. They aggregate all the data that comes off a building, from the HVAC systems, from the heating systems, from the lighting systems. And they aggregate all that data and they can give insights back into the building operators about how they can run the building more efficiently, to reduce energy bills, to cut carbon emissions. And here's the thing, they're based out in Scoresby, out in the old Caribbean gardens, where I used to live, right? That used to be a kind of a creepy place when I used to go out there. There was an old fairground out there back in the day. I used to drive past it on the way to VFL Park back when I was a young kid growing up. And they have a team of software engineers there who are writing code every day for their products. And here's the thing, they've never sold a single product in Australia. Never sold a single product in Australia. From day one, they focused on the US market, selling to Fortune 500 companies in the US. And they did that because they knew that they could get to scale so much quicker by going after that market rather than focusing purely on Australia. And they have been very, very successful. So successful, in fact, that we paid $100 million this year to acquire them. And the reason we like them is because they developed a global platform and they proved themselves in a global market. It's unlikely we would have acquired them if they only ever sold product in Australia. I couldn't have piqued the interest of the guys who write the checks in headquarters. So now we'll invest in that business and we'll scale it even further. And this is a great Australian innovation story. And the wonderful thing about it is about Daintree Networks is despite the fact that they've got a team and an office in Silicon Valley, a sales team and an office in Silicon Valley, they've kept their software engineers here in suburban Melbourne. And they have all of their software engineers here in suburban Melbourne because they're of the view that their Australian talent are smart, they're less expensive than software engineers in Silicon Valley, and they're much, much more loyal than anything you're going to get in Silicon Valley. So this is just a great story of Australian innovation, and it has to be the template for Australian innovation generally. We need to think big, we need to think global, and we need to have the courage to take on the world. And you know what? We can do it. We can absolutely do it. It's not unrealistic. It's not beyond our capability. It's not beyond our capacity. We just need to want it. We just need to want it, and we need to have the right culture to go after it. So look, I grew up in Australia in the 1970s and 1980s. And the Australia I grew up in wasn't perfect. And there's a lot today that's much, much better than Australia back then. But as the line goes, back then we were young and free. And the benefit of youth is that they have an unconstrained view of the future and they have the most to lose from the status quo. So taking risks and driving change is absolutely natural when you're young and free. As we've matured as a nation, it's also only natural that our culture has changed. We're not as lean, we're not as agile, we're not as aggressive. That have-a-go culture that once defined us and we were so proud of, look, the reality is, that's a thing of the past. It's a thing of the past, but we need to get back. The outrage that we feel when we slipped a 10th on the Olympic medal tally needs to be applied to our competitiveness in business and trade and our focus around innovation. We need to get back to being a fierce competitor. We need to get back to being a country that benchmarks itself against the very best, that doesn't accept failure, that looks ruthlessly to exploit any advantage that we have, and is uncompromising and 100% honest in facing into and fixing our weaknesses. That cultural shift also needs to underpin our investment thesis as a country. See, we used to be a low-cost, low-risk, high-return place to invest. Over time, we've become high-cost, high-risk, and low-return. And that is not a winning formula. And we have to have the courage to admit that so we can get on with the business of driving change. And we all have a role to play. The collective leadership of the country, whether it be business, academia, politics, research institutes, we all need to recognise and acknowledge that if Australia is going to compete, cultural change is needed. We all have to find our voice and we all have to call out the things that are holding us back. We have to use our leadership positions to influence and drive change. And this is my ask of you. This is my ask of you, the people in the room today. You are the future leaders of this country. You are all the future leaders of this country. Many of you will go on to become CEOs, leaders in politics or academia, thought leaders in think tanks, research institutes, or the media. And as you rise up the ladder, you will find yourself in positions of influence. It's a real privilege to be able to contribute to and shape the narrative and ambition of your country. But you know what? It's actually more than that. It's not just a privilege, it's an obligation. And you need to honour that obligation. Don't sit on the sidelines and complain. Get into the arena of battle and make a difference. Because that is true leadership. And that is what Australia needs. Thank you.